She woke up to the soft light of the morning slipping through the thin curtains of her small apartment. The room smelled faintly of coffee from the night before, and the faint hint of the cold air outside. She lay for a few moments, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the day ahead, not that there was much to look forward to. Her life had become a series of quiet days that followed one after the other without much change. She got up slowly and moved to the kitchen to make herself a simple breakfast, something she could eat without much thought. The kettle hissed as it boiled water, and she poured it carefully into a cup. She sipped slowly, enjoying the warmth even though it did little to chase the emptiness that seemed to linger around. The apartment was silent, except for the occasional sound of traffic outside and the faint hum of the refrigerator. She looked around at the bare walls and the few pieces of furniture she owned. There were small signs of life scattered here and there: a mug that had dried tea stains, a book she had started but never finished, a photograph she had taken years ago that no one had seen for a long time. Everything spoke of a life that had once been hopeful and full of dreams, but had now become quiet and solitary. She wondered when things had started to change, when the people she had once known and trusted had slowly disappeared from her life. Friends moved away or got busy with their own lives. Family reached out less and less until the phone calls and messages stopped altogether. She tried not to feel hurt, but there were nights when the loneliness pressed heavily on her chest and she could not breathe properly. It was during those nights that she felt the absence of connection the most. She dressed slowly, choosing simple clothes that would not draw attention to her presence. She had grown used to moving through the world as if she were invisible. The streets were familiar to her, even though they seemed to move on without noticing her at all. People passed by with hurried steps and quiet conversations. She sometimes listened to them, wondering if anyone would ever notice her the way she noticed them. She walked to the bus stop, taking her time, even though she had no pressing place to go. The park nearby called to her sometimes, not because she had a particular purpose, but because it reminded her of the days when the world had felt lighter and warmer. She found a bench under a large tree and sat watching the branches swayed gently with the wind. Children played in the distance, their laughter carried on the cold air. She watched them carefully, noticing how freely they ran without worry or hesitation. Their joy was small, yet immense. It reminded her of the times she had felt happiness without thinking about the future or past. She remembered her own childhood, the games she played, the stories she told herself about life, and how she had imagined a world where she was never alone. Those dreams had faded slowly as the years passed, and the weight of rejection and disappointment grew heavier. She tried not to dwell on those memories too long, but sometimes they came back, uninvited, filling her with a mixture of nostalgia and sorrow. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, feeling the chill of the morning. The city was alive in its usual way, people walking with purpose, cars moving steadily along the streets, the occasional siren in the distance. She moved among them, yet she felt separated, as if a glass wall surrounded her. She tried to smile at strangers, hoping for a nod or a friendly glance, but most of the time, they did not notice her at all. It had been like this for years. She had grown accustomed to the silence, the quiet that wrapped around her like a blanket that both comforted and suffocated her at the same time. She told herself that she was strong because she had survived this long. Alone, but sometimes the thought of being alone forever terrified her more than she would admit. She had small routines that gave her life structure. Even if it did not bring joy, she walked to the same shops, picked the same aisles, bought the same simple foods. She cleaned her apartment slowly, making sure everything was in order, though there was no one to see it. She cooked meals for one, carefully measuring ingredients, not for pleasure, but for the act itself. There was a sense of discipline in the monotony, something that made the days pass without too much pain, though. The heartache lingered quietly beneath the surface. She often wrote small notes to herself about the things she wanted to do, the places she wanted to see, yet she rarely followed through. Dreams felt heavy because they reminded her of all the things that had not happened. Evenings were the hardest. The sun dipped behind the buildings and shadows filled the apartment. She would sit near the window sometimes, reading a book or listening to the radio. But often she would simply stare outside, watching the lights of the city flicker. She thought about what life could have been, what life should have been. She thought about the friends who had disappeared, the family who had drifted away, and the opportunities that had been lost. There was a quiet grief in her heart that had no words, a sadness that she could not shake, no matter how much she tried. She thought about calling someone, but there was no one to call. Even the thought of reaching out to old friends seemed impossible. They had moved on, and she had stayed behind like a shadow fading in the background. Sometimes, she took long walks at night when the streets were quieter. She wandered through familiar neighborhoods, the smell of baking bread, the faint aroma of flowers in the park. She noticed small things that others ignored, the way a street lamp flickered, the quiet hum of a cat moving across a roof, the sound of distant music from a party she would never attend. These small moments were her companions in the silence, her way of reminding herself that the world was still alive even if she felt removed from it. She imagined stories for the people she passed, the lives they led, the love they shared. It was a strange comfort to think of others finding happiness, while she watched quietly from the sidelines. There were times when she tried new things to fill the emptiness. She enrolled in a class once, but left after a few weeks because she felt out of place. She joined a small club to meet people, but it did not last long because she could not bring herself to speak up. She had tried dating, though it had ended in disappointment every time. She realized that she had grown used to rejection, that it no longer felt like an unexpected blow, but something she expected. Each failed attempt, each closed door reinforced the idea that perhaps she was meant to be alone. Yet somewhere deep inside, she held on to the smallest flicker of hope that maybe one day someone would see her not as the person who had been left behind, but as someone who mattered. She found small joys where she could. The first bloom of spring, the smell of rain on the pavement, the quiet moments when a bird landed near her window. These were the little things that reminded her life was worth living even if the days were lonely. She kept a small notebook in which she recorded these observations, small victories over the darkness. She wrote about the sound of leaves in the wind, the taste of fresh bread, the way the sun warmed her face on an early morning walk. These were tiny reminders that the world had beauty if she looked closely enough. She told herself that these small moments mattered even if no one else would ever know or care. Sometimes she imagined what it would be like if someone entered her life, not to take something but simply to be there. She imagined the quiet presence of a friend sitting beside her talking about nothing important, yet everything meaningful. She imagined laughter echoing through her apartment, someone knocking on her door simply to share a cup of tea. These thoughts gave her a strange comfort and a strange ache at the same time. She knew it was possible to feel connection again, but the fear of disappointment made her hold back. Still, she waited quietly for that moment when something unexpected would break through the silence. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next. She walked through life with quiet determination, carrying her small routines like lifelines. She greeted strangers with a nod, sometimes smiled at children playing in the park. She noticed small acts of kindness around her, a man helping an elderly woman across the street, a neighbor bringing in groceries for someone unable to lift them. She kept these small observations close to her heart, as proof that the world was not entirely cruel. There were moments when she allowed herself to dream that she could be part of that world too, not just an observer, but a participant in the simple joys of life. She did not know when the change would come. Some days, she wondered if it ever would. She told herself that perhaps this was her life, a quiet existence filled with small pleasures and quiet loneliness. Yet she never gave up hope entirely. She continued to walk to the park to watch the world move around her. She continued to drink her tea, slowly savoring the warmth. She continued to notice the small things that others overlooked. And in the quiet corners of her heart, she waited for a day when something unexpected would appear, when someone would reach out and see her as more than invisible, when she would finally feel what it was like to belong somewhere. The waiting was long and sometimes painful, but it was not without its purpose. She learned to survive on her own, to find beauty in small moments, to care for herself when no one else did. And in that waiting, there was a quiet strength forming a resilience that even she did not fully understand. She moved through the world quietly, aware of the loneliness, yet unwilling to let it define her entirely. Every morning she woke, and performed her small rituals walked. The familiar streets watched the children play and kept hope alive in the smallest corners of her heart. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she carried on patiently, quietly waiting for the day when the world would offer her more than rejection and solitude. She walked through the park in the late afternoon, feeling the chill of the air on her cheeks. The light was soft and golden, spilling across the grass and trees in gentle warmth. She had come here out of habit more than expectation, carrying the quiet weight of her days with her. The park was calm, except for the occasional rustle of leaves and distant sounds of life she normally did not notice. She found her usual bench beneath a large tree and sat slowly, letting her eyes wander across the open space. Her mind moved quietly through memories and thoughts, the loneliness of the past weeks pressing against her even as the park offered a small sense of relief. Her attention shifted when she noticed movement nearby. A child ran across the grass, playing alone, laughing softly at their own imagination. There was no one else around them, and for some reason this struck her deeply. The sound of laughter was foreign in her quiet life, a small bell of innocence cutting through the stillness that usually surrounded her. She watched the child carefully, noticing the way they ran, their small arms swinging with energy, the way their hair caught the sunlight, the way their small feet pounded the soft earth. There was something about the purity of their joy that felt like a window into a world she had long forgotten. The child saw her watching and paused for a moment. Their eyes met hers across the distance, and she felt a strange shift inside her, as if an invisible line had connected their small heart to hers. She did not know why, but she felt a sense of recognition, a small spark of warmth that was unfamiliar. The child smiled and waved gently, their small hand moving in the air as if inviting her into their play. She hesitated at first, unsure if she should respond. It had been years since anyone had invited her into their world simply for who she was. She nodded slowly, and the child's smile grew wider. They ran closer, their steps light and eager, their small excitement filling the space between them. When the child reached her, they held out a small piece of paper. She took it carefully and looked down at what had been offered. It was a drawing, simple and full of color, a little house with a sun in the corner, and what looked like a figure standing beside it. She smiled quietly inside, feeling a strange flutter she had not felt in a long time. The child pointed to the figure on the paper and whispered something softly she could not hear, but understood anyway. She nodded and said a small word. The child responded with laughter that rang out like music across the park. The moment was brief, but profound. It was small enough to be ordinary, yet it carried the weight of something extraordinary, a connection forming silently between two beings who had both known solitude in different ways. She asked the child questions, carefully keeping her voice gentle and light. The child spoke shyly at first, their small words tumbling out in bursts of enthusiasm and shyness. They talked about the drawing, the game they had been playing, the little stories they had made up. It's about invisible friends and imaginary adventures. She listened closely, enjoying the sound of their voice, the rhythm of their sentences, the sincerity behind their words. For the first time in years, she felt her heart move in response to someone else, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to be present. The world around them seemed to pause, as if giving them space to exist together for a brief, perfect moment. The child led her to a spot on the grass, where they had built a small imaginary world. They moved small sticks and stones into patterns, creating houses and paths and creatures only they could see. She knelt down beside them, trying to follow their instructions, carefully moving the small items just right. She laughed quietly when the child praised her efforts, and she felt warmth spread through her chest. The act of creation together, however simple it was, became a bridge between her long isolation and a new possibility she had not considered before. She had never expected that a stranger, a child, could offer her a moment so full of life, so full of meaning, without asking for anything in return. They spent the next hour exploring the park together in small ways. The child pointed out flowers that smelled sweet, the way the sunlight made patterns on the ground, the small animals hiding in bushes and trees. She followed along carefully, noticing things she had never seen before in the park, even though she had walked there hundreds of times. The child's perspective opened her eyes and heart. It was as if the world had become larger, more vivid, and she had been blind to it until now. She laughed softly at the child's enthusiasm, copying small movements and pretending to be part of their imaginary adventures. There was no self-consciousness, no fear, only presence and attention, and it felt miraculous to her that she could be seen and included in such a simple yet profound way. At some point, the child sat down on the grass, looking up at her with wide eyes. They held out a small snack they had brought from home. She took it gently and smiled as she ate a piece, listening to them talk quietly. The intimacy of the moment was delicate and soft, as if the world had slowed down to give them space. She realized that she was no longer alone, that this small presence beside her carried something she had been missing for years: companionship, understanding, acceptance. The child did not judge or expect anything from her yet. They gave her something far greater than anything she had received from adults for years. She felt her chest swell with gratitude and surprise. She had not imagined that such a simple act could make her feel so full. Time passed, and the sky shifted from gold to soft pink, and then the quiet blue of evening. They continued their small explorations, moving through the park, slowly enjoying the final light of the day. She asked small questions about the child's life, school friends, hobbies, and the child answered with careful thought or sudden bursts of excitement. She listened closely, storing each word in her memory. The sound of another human voice reaching out to her felt foreign, yet natural, and she realized how hungry she had been for connection. Each question and answer, each small laugh and gesture, built a foundation she had long forgotten she could experience. She felt light in a way she had not felt in years. The child asked her to come back the next day to play at the park. She hesitated for a moment, thinking of the routines she had grown used to, the thought of leaving her apartment and stepping into the world in a new way. But the child's eyes looked at her with hopefulness, and she found herself nodding. She agreed, and the child jumped up, clapping small hands together, their excitement almost tangible. She smiled quietly inside and felt warmth spread through her being. It was a promise of something new, a small step out of her isolation into a world that had remained closed to her for too long. She felt anticipation she had not allowed herself to feel in years. When it was time to leave, she stood slowly and gathered her things. The child walked beside her, holding her hand lightly and carefully. They did not speak much on the way out of the park, but the presence of each other was enough. She noticed the small weight of the child's hand in hers, a simple connection carrying more meaning than words could express. As they reached the edge of the park, the child waved shyly, and she waved back, holding on to the warmth of the day. She left the park with a strange lightness moving through her chest. She realized that something small and unexpected had entered her life, and even though it was only the first encounter, it had already shifted the way she thought about the days to come. That evening, she sat in her apartment reflecting on the events of the day. She took out a small notebook and wrote down the things that had happened. The child's laughter, the colors of the drawing, the gentle trust they had offered her. She wrote slowly, savoring each moment as if writing it down would make it last longer. She noticed that her heart felt different, softer, more open, as if the walls she had built around herself over years of loneliness were shifting slightly. She felt cautious hope mingled with surprise. It was as if she had been waiting for someone to see her for a long time, and now a small part of the world had finally done so, without expecting anything in return. She thought about the child repeatedly over the next few days, remembering the way they had run across the grass, the small hand reaching out, the eyes full of trust. She found herself walking to the park earlier than usual, thinking perhaps she would see them again. She wondered if it was a trick of the mind to feel so connected after a single meeting, or if perhaps there was the possibility of something more. Her heart felt tentative and fragile in a way it had not for years. She told herself not to expect too much yet. The small spark of anticipation would not be dimmed. It was strange and frightening and wonderful all at once to feel her world shift after so long in quiet isolation. When she returned to the park, she found the child waiting as promised. The excitement that shone in their eyes mirrored the warmth in her own chest. They ran to meet her, small feet barely touching the ground as they moved. Then, with a smile, and they offered another drawing, this one more elaborate than the last. She accepted it carefully, marveling at the colors and the small creativity. They began to play again, exploring the park and imagining small adventures. She followed along, trying to match their energy, keeping up with their ideas and laughing quietly at the moments they created together. Each interaction deepened, the quiet bond forming between them, a small bridge into a world of connection she had long forgotten she could access. Over the next days, she returned to the park again and again. Each meeting felt like a new discovery, a small treasure of human connection she had long believed lost to her. The child shared stories about school, about friends, about dreams they had quietly whispered to her. She listened carefully, offering encouragement and small laughter. She felt her heart grow lighter with each encounter, her chest loosening from the weight of solitude. She began to look forward to the walks to the park, the simple moments of companionship that gave her life a reason to step outside. It was astonishing how much joy could come from the presence of a single small person who asked nothing from her yet, gave everything in return. She realized that she was beginning to care deeply, not out of obligation, but from genuine love and attention. The world seemed fuller, brighter, more alive in the presence of the child. She began to notice her own smiles, returning her own laughter coming naturally again. She started seeing the city differently, noticing small acts of kindness around her, and savoring the beauty she had once overlooked. The child had opened a door that she thought was permanently closed. Each day they spent together built a small foundation of trust and warmth, a sense that life could be different than she had imagined. The emptiness that had defined her for so long began to feel less permanent. As evening fell on one of these days, she sat once more in her apartment, reflecting on what had happened. She realized that she had waited for something she could not name for years. She had lived quietly hoping for connection, but not knowing it would appear in such an unexpected form. The child had offered her something she had long thought impossible: belonging, attention, love without demand. It was the beginning of something new, a shift from isolation to the possibility of family, even if she did not yet understand how it would take shape. She went to sleep that night with a sense of anticipation and warmth, a feeling that the world was opening just slightly to allow her back into it. She woke to the quiet morning sun slipping through the thin curtains, and felt a sense of anticipation she had not known for years. The thought of the day ahead made her move with a lightness she had almost forgotten. She dressed simply and moved through her small apartment, noticing the familiar objects around her. Each one seemed less lonely today, as if the world outside her walls had begun to seep in through the memory of the previous days. She thought of the child waiting at the park and felt her chest warm with something she had thought lost long ago. It was not just the memory of a single encounter, it was the possibility of companionship and the gentle reassurance that someone truly wanted to be near her. She walked to the park slowly, savoring each step, even though the city around her moved quickly and without pause. She noticed small details as she went: the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery, the soft sound of a bird taking flight, the way sunlight danced on the windows of buildings. It was as if the world had become richer, because there was someone waiting for her to see it together. When she arrived, she saw the child sitting under a tree, waiting as promised. Their eyes lit up when they saw her, and they ran across the grass to meet her. She smiled quietly and knelt to greet them. The small hand that reached for hers felt familiar, already carrying a comfort she had never expected to find. They began their small adventures, immediately moving through the park with imaginative energy that was infectious. The child led her to a small hidden corner of the park where wildflowers grew and tiny creatures could be found if one looked carefully. They crouched together, noticing ants carrying leaves, small insects moving among the grass, the patterns of sunlight on the ground. She asked questions softly, listening to the child's explanations and stories about the life of the park as if they were characters in an ongoing tale. She laughed quietly at the child's interpretations and delighted in the simplicity of their perspective. It was a joy that had nothing to do with achievement or expectation, simply being present and sharing attention and care. At some point, they sat on the grass together, sharing a snack the child had brought. They talked quietly about small things, school friends' favorite games, and what they liked to do when alone. She listened closely, offering gentle responses that encouraged the child to speak freely. In their voice, she heard honesty and curiosity, and she realized that for the first time in a long time, she could respond with warmth instead of caution. Each word they shared built trust, each small gesture a bridge from her solitude to a shared world of companionship. She felt her heart loosen in a way that surprised her, realizing that her own life had been missing these small connections and simple joys. The child showed her how to build a small fort with sticks and leaves, arranging them carefully and explaining the rules of the imaginary game they had invented. She followed instructions eagerly, sometimes making mistakes and laughing quietly as the child corrected her gently. The playfulness and patience of the child made her realize how much she had longed for these simple interactions. It was not a game, it was an exchange of trust and creativity, a way to be seen and valued without judgment. Quickly, with the sun moving slowly toward the horizon while they worked and imagined and shared quiet laughter, she noticed her own hands working with skill and care, remembering how much she had missed the sensation of creating something together. They paused occasionally to watch the birds in the trees, the way the wind moved through the branches and the soft rustle of leaves. The child explained things. They noticed the patterns of movement, the small details of the world that adults often overlooked. She listened with attention, marveling at the child's perspective. She realized that her life had been narrowed by loneliness and routine, and that this small presence beside her had opened a new way of seeing everything. Each observation the child made felt like a gift, and she responded with curiosity and interest, feeling her mind and heart expand with each moment shared. The world felt larger somehow, and she felt grateful for the small light the child had brought into her days. When a sudden breeze lifted the fallen leaves around them, she laughed quietly with the child, chasing the dancing foliage. Their laughter mingled quietly with the sounds of the park, creating a small harmony of joy that neither had expected but both enjoyed. She felt a freedom she had not experienced in years, a lightness of being that filled her chest with warmth. The child ran ahead, then returned to her side, holding out a small treasure, a stone shaped like a heart. She took it carefully, holding it in her hand, and thanked the child with a smile that came from the depths of her heart. The gesture was simple, but it carried meaning, a bridge of trust and affection forming quietly between them. As the sun began to set, the colors of the sky softened into pink and orange, and she felt the urge to linger. Even though evening was approaching, the child sat beside her, holding her hand lightly, a gesture of comfort and belonging. They talked quietly about the day, the adventures they had imagined, the stories they had shared. She found herself sharing small pieces of her life memories she had not spoken aloud for years. The child listened with attention, as if understanding the weight behind her words. It was a presence that offered acceptance without judgment, and she realized that she could trust this connection more than she had ever thought possible. Her heart felt safe and open in a way that she had not felt in a long time. Over the next few weeks, their meetings became routine, and yet every encounter felt new and alive. They explored different corners of the park, noticing small details each time she saw something she had never noticed before, the child guiding her attention with gentle insistence. They collected leaves and stones and twigs and built small arrangements on the grass, creating little worlds only they could understand. She felt her heart grow lighter with each shared creation, each small act of collaboration reinforcing the quiet bond that had started to form. She noticed her own thoughts moving differently, more brightly, more freely, as if the loneliness that had once pressed so heavily on her chest was slowly easing. She began to anticipate the moments with the child with a sense of excitement she had not known in years. Her apartment felt less lonely in the evenings because she carried the memory of the day with her. She replayed the small details, the way one savors a favorite story, the child's laughter, the movement of their hands as they worked together, the curiosity in their eyes when discovering something new. Each detail was a thread, weaving a new tapestry of hope and warmth that she had not realized she could feel again. She began to see herself differently, not as someone left behind or forgotten, but as someone capable of being part of a world where her presence mattered. The child noticed small things about her, to the way she smiled, the quiet laughter that sometimes escaped her, the gentle tone of her voice. They showed appreciation for her effort in the games and the stories and the small adventures. She noticed the pride in their small gestures and the happiness in their eyes when she was near. Each recognition was a balm to the quiet wound she had carried for years. She felt seen and valued in a way that went beyond the ordinary interactions she had grown used to. It was a gift she could not have anticipated, a simple presence that changed the way she experienced her days. She began to bring small items from home to share with the child, a book of stories she had read long ago, a small bag of cookies she baked herself, a scarf she had knitted for warmth. The child received each offering with delight, sharing small comments and returning gestures of gratitude in their own innocent way. The exchange became a rhythm of giving and receiving, a practice of attention and care that strengthened their connection. She felt the joy of small acts repeated over and over, the quiet satisfaction of being useful and important in the life of someone else. She realized that she had been waiting for this kind of connection without knowing it for years, and now it had arrived in the most unexpected and beautiful way. The bond they built extended beyond play and imagination. They sat together quietly, noticing the changing seasons, the soft wind against their faces, the smell of damp earth after rain. They spoke about hopes and dreams, small and large, about wishes and ideas that seemed trivial yet meaningful in the context of their shared presence. She began to feel that her own voice mattered, that her thoughts were worth sharing, and that someone would listen with genuine care. Each conversation became a bridge from her previous isolation to a life that carried the promise of companionship and subtle joy. Evenings were spent reflecting on the day. She would sit in her apartment holding small items the child had given her, drawings, stones, leaves, and smile quietly. She replayed each moment with attention, savoring the nuances the child's presence had brought to her life. Her loneliness had not disappeared entirely, but it had softened. She could feel warmth building slowly inside her chest, a quiet strength forming from shared experiences and gentle attention. The days had become lighter, brighter, more promising as the bond with the child deepened. She found herself looking forward to the park, not just for the routine, but for the connection it offered. Each day became a chapter in a story she had longed to live, yet thought impossible. She learned to notice joy in small details, to celebrate tiny victories in play and imagination. She laughed freely more often, spoke softly yet openly about thoughts and feelings she had hidden. She felt her heart stretched toward the child naturally, without fear of expectation or loss. It was a slow, steady healing, a quiet rebirth of the part of her soul that had been left in shadow for so long. She noticed how much she had changed over the weeks, how much her perception of the world had shifted. The city streets did not feel as lonely. The small apartment did not feel as cold. The quiet of her own thoughts was less oppressive because she carried with her the warmth of shared laughter and attention. Even ordinary events took on new meaning. She greeted neighbors with small smiles, noticing their gestures of kindness. She watched life unfold around her with greater sensitivity, and felt a part of a world that had seemed closed for too long. She realized that the child had offered more than companionship. They had offered a mirror in which she could see the possibility of belonging. Each day together reinforced her sense of self-worth and capacity for love and attention. The ordinary moments of snack sharing, storytelling, play, and observation became sacred rituals that grounded her in a reality richer than she had imagined. She began to look forward to the future, quietly hoping for continued presence, for growth in this bond that had already transformed her, and as the sun set each day, she walked back to her apartment, carrying not just memories but the warmth of belonging, small yet powerful hope that she had not dared to feel before. She knew that life had not always been kind, and that the loneliness she had endured was real and heavy. But she also knew now that change was possible, and that connection could arrive. Unexpectedly in form she could never have predicted. The child's small hand reaching for hers, the laughter shared, the quiet attentiveness of hours spent together had created a pathway toward something greater, something full of life and quiet joy. She woke to the soft light of morning streaming through the window and felt the quiet anticipation of another day in the park, Over the past weeks, her visits had become the highlight of her days, each meeting with the child building warmth in her heart she had not known for years. She dressed simply, taking care to be comfortable yet presentable for the day ahead. The city outside moved quickly, and she moved through it, slowly savoring the small sounds and movements that were usually unnoticed. She carried a quiet excitement that she barely understood but welcomed, nonetheless knowing that her life had begun to shift in subtle ways she had never imagined. When she arrived at the park, she noticed the child, waiting under their usual tree, holding a small bundle of drawings and stones. Their eyes lit up when they saw her, and they ran across the grass, laughing softly as if they could barely contain their joy. She knelt to greet them, taking the small hand that reached for hers, and felt a warmth spread through her chest that had been absent for years. They walked slowly through the park together, the child pointing out flowers and insects, the patterns of sunlight on the ground, the tiny changes in the wind. She listened carefully, following their lead and allowing herself to be immersed in the small world the child had created around them. As they played, she noticed a pair of figures approaching. From the distance, watching them carefully, they seemed hesitant and unsure of how to approach, and she felt a flicker of curiosity and caution. The child ran to meet them, speaking quickly, their small voice full of excitement and insistence. She stood back, observing as the figures knelt slightly to meet the child at eye level. Their attention was focused on the child, yet occasionally flickered toward her with a mixture of curiosity and recognition. She could sense that they were noticing the bond she and the child had formed, and the way the child depended on her presence. It was a quiet observation filled with unspoken questions and careful attention. The figures spoke softly to the child, and she listened quietly to their words. She did not understand everything, but she understood the intention, the care behind their tone, and the way they watched her closely. She noticed the child glancing toward her with a mixture of excitement and reassurance, as if seeking her acknowledgement that this moment was safe. She nodded slightly and smiled gently, encouraging the child to continue the conversation. The trust they shared was evident in the ease with which the child included her in the moment despite the new presence. She felt her heart swell with cautious hope, knowing that this interaction could mark another turning point in her quiet life. The figures asked questions about her presence in the park, about the activities she shared with the child, and about the time spent together. She answered softly with honesty, describing the simple routines and imaginative play that had become their shared world. She felt nervous, yet grounded, noticing the careful attention they gave her words, the way they seemed to understand without judgment. The child added small comments, excitement coloring their speech, the figures listening and responding with care. It was a delicate dance of recognition and understanding, a moment where her existence was being acknowledged beyond the routine of the park. After a while, the figures stepped closer, explaining gently that they had noticed how much the child looked forward to her visits, how their happiness seemed intertwined with her presence. They spoke of their appreciation and the desire for the child to have her close in their life beyond the park. They offered her a small seat on the bench, inviting her to consider becoming part of the family in a way that was meaningful and intentional. She listened carefully, feeling the weight of the offer, her chest filling with an unfamiliar mixture of disbelief and hope. It was more than she had dared to expect, more than the quiet moments she had grown used to. It was an invitation to belong. The child clutched her hand lightly as the figure spoke, watching her face for a reaction. She felt the warmth of trust and expectation in their small gesture and realized that the bond they shared had been noticed and valued. The figure spoke, patiently answering her quiet questions about what this would mean, how the routines would change, and what responsibilities would be involved. She absorbed each word, carefully weighing the offer, knowing that it was a decision that could alter the course of her life. The child's eyes never left hers, full of hope and trust in a way that made it impossible to refuse lightly. She spent a few moments quietly reflecting on the past weeks. The laughter, the imaginative adventures, the quiet conversations, the shared meals and walks. She remembered the loneliness that had once pressed heavily on her chest, the isolation that had made days long and nights empty. She felt the shift in her own heart, the quiet healing that had begun with the first small connection in the park. She realized that this offer was not just an opportunity, it was an affirmation that her presence mattered, that her love and attention had value beyond herself. The thought filled her chest with warmth and tentative hope. The figure smiled softly, noticing the expression on her face, and offered reassurance that there would be no sudden changes, that the child's well-being would remain the priority, and that her place in the family would be respected and nurtured. They spoke of small routines, shared meals, time together, in ways she could be included in decision, gently explaining that this was not a fleeting offer, but a meaningful integration into the life of the child. She listened carefully, noting the sincerity in their voices, the careful choice of words, the intention behind each phrase. The trust she had built with the child now extended into this new circle with careful guidance and openness. She looked at the child once more, noticing the small, hopeful smile, the bright eyes, the gentle squeeze of her hand.
Ouch.
She felt the pull of the connection that had grown steadily over weeks of shared experience, the laughter, the small adventures, the quiet attentiveness that had built a bridge from loneliness to belonging. She realized that the child had offered her far more than companionship. They had offered her a place in a life she had longed for without knowing it. Her heart moved toward acceptance, slowly, carefully, embracing the possibility of family and connection. They began to walk together through the park, slowly sharing stories about what each day might look like, now that the offer had been made. The child chattered softly, excitedly, imagining new adventures that included her in ways she had never been part of before. She listened and responded with gentle interest, feeling a growing warmth in her chest. The figures followed at a respectful distance, allowing the child to lead the conversation, guiding subtly when needed. She realized that she was no longer alone, that her days would now be filled with presence, care, and shared attention. The thought was both exhilarating and grounding. Over the next several days, she spent time with the family, learning routines, small gestures and habits that would integrate her smoothly into their lives. The child guided her patiently, showing where favorite toys were kept, how to participate in small rituals, and how to communicate with patience and care. She followed their leads, slowly learning the rhythm of a shared household, noticing the warmth and consideration extended by the figures as they accommodated her presence. She felt gradually a sense of belonging building around her, like a soft light filling spaces that had been empty for years. Evenings became times of quiet reflection and shared conversation. She noticed how much she had grown accustomed to this new rhythm, the ease with which she moved through spaces with the child beside her, the comfort in shared meals and quiet laughter. Each interaction reinforced the reality of her place in this new circle. She felt her heart open more fully with each day, noticing the little ways she mattered, noticing the gentle acknowledgement of her presence, noticing that her care and attention were appreciated and valued. The quiet loneliness of the past seemed less urgent, replaced with subtle joy and anticipation for what each day would bring. She spent time learning small details about the child's routines, favorite activities, and the subtle cues that indicated moods and feelings. The child guided her with gentle patience, explaining small needs and desires that might not otherwise have been noticed. She began to anticipate the child's needs, intuitively noticing a small shift in tone, a glance, a movement, and responding appropriately. The connection deepened naturally and effortlessly, a blend of trust, affection, and quiet joy. She marveled at how much she had learned from the child, from their perspective and energy, and how it had begun to change her own understanding of life and human connection. The figures continued to include her in small ways, gradually expanding her role in the household, offering guidance, but not pressure, allowing her to find her place organically. She felt gratitude and relief in this approach, noticing how much the gentle acceptance eased her transition from solitude to family life. Each day, she observed small acts of kindness, attention to detail, and patience extended to the child, and to her, reinforcing the quiet sense of safety and belonging that was forming. She realized that the home was becoming a space where she could breathe fully, feel fully, live fully, without the heavy weight of loneliness pressing against her chest. Over time, she began to contribute small acts of care, voluntarily preparing snacks for the child, creating small projects together, arranging routines that made the child comfortable and happy. She noticed how the child's eyes lit up when she participated, actively noticing the pride and joy in shared accomplishment. Each small gesture reinforced the bond, and slowly the quiet foundation of family began to solidify. She felt her heart stretch with love and responsibility without fear or hesitation. The days felt fuller, richer, more alive. She realized that the moment she had waited for her entire life had begun to appear in unexpected forms, offered by small trust and sincere attention. Evenings became opportunities to reflect on the transformation she was experiencing. She sat quietly with the child nearby and considered the journey from lonely park visits to the first meeting with the family to now being welcomed into routines and trust. She marveled at the quiet unfolding of life, noticing how much could change from a single small act of connection. Her heart swelled with gratitude for the patience and love extended to her and for the child, who had unknowingly opened a doorway into a world she had longed to inhabit. Each moment of shared laughter and attention reinforced the reality of belonging. She realized finally that she was no longer waiting for connection. It had found her in the most unexpected way. Child's trust and love, the gentle patience of the figures offering a place in their lives, had created a sanctuary she had never imagined possible. Her heart felt steady and alive, noticing the possibilities of new beginnings, small joys, and shared responsibilities. She understood now that family was not only about blood or history, but about care, attention, love, and trust built over time. She felt a profound, quiet peace knowing that her presence was valued, that her heart had a place to reside. And as the sun set on one of these early evenings, she walked slowly beside the child, feeling their small hand in hers, feeling the gentle attention of the figures nearby, feeling warmth and belonging spread through her chest. She knew that her life had changed forever, that the lonely days of waiting had given way to a future full of shared laughter, care, and quiet joy that she had once believed impossible.